They say true betrayal doesn't come from enemies, but from those who claim to love us most. Imagine a lavish mansion where a pregnant wife faces her husband's mistress. The tension crackles like electricity as Sophia's venomous smile spreads across her face. "He's tired of you," she hisses, stepping closer to Victoria, whose hand instinctively shields her unborn child. Then it happens, the crack of Sophia's hand striking Victoria's cheek echoes through the room. But instead of defending his pregnant wife, Maxwell only gently restrains his mistress, his concern clearly for the wrong woman. What nobody realizes in this moment of ultimate betrayal, Victoria has been recording everything. This shocking, true story of deception, assault, and a wife's brilliant revenge will leave you speechless. Like this video if you believe in standing up for yourself. And subscribe for more incredible stories of resilience, justice, and triumph over those who underestimate the quiet ones. The most spectacular revenge is the one they never see coming. They say true betrayal doesn't come from enemies, but from those who claim to love us most. Imagine a lavish estate where a pregnant wife is forced to watch her husband defend another woman. Picture the mistress, a venomous smile on her lips, raising her hand and striking the wife, her expensive bracelet glinting under the chandelier. And as shocking as that moment is, the biggest twist has yet to be revealed because the betrayed wife has secretly recorded everything. In the affluent community of Lakewood Estates, Connecticut, stands the Matthews Mansion, a magnificent Georgian-style residence with pristine white columns and imported stone. The immaculate property, worth well over $8 million, represents the pinnacle of East Coast luxury living and hides secrets as deep as its manicured gardens. Victoria Matthews, a radiant woman of 30, stepped carefully down the winding staircase one crisp autumn morning, one hand protectively cradling her 5-month pregnant belly. Her honey blonde hair was pulled back in a simple chignon, her blue eyes troubled despite the morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows. Through the foyer, she could see her husband, Maxwell Matthews, pacing on the terrace, phone pressed firmly to his ear, his expression stormy. "I don't care what it takes. Get it done." He barked into the phone before abruptly ending the call. At 35, Maxwell had transformed from a computer science graduate with ambitious dreams to one of Connecticut's most successful tech entrepreneurs. His company, Pinnacle Innovations, had revolutionized data security systems, an irony not lost on Victoria as she contemplated the growing insecurity of her own marriage. "Is everything all right?" Victoria asked softly as she approached. "You seem tense lately." Maxwell's dark eyes flickered briefly to hers before returning to his phone. "Just business. Vic, nothing for you to worry about." He never quite met her gaze these days, a subtle but significant change that had begun 3 months ago. "I thought we might have lunch together today," she suggested, trying to recapture some semblance of the intimacy they once shared. "Dr. Bennett says I should be eating more protein for the baby, and there's that new bistro in town." "Can't today," Maxwell cut her off, checking his watch. "Board meeting at 11, then investor calls all afternoon." He brushed past her, dropping a perfunctory kiss on her cheek. "Don't wait up tonight. Might be late." Victoria stood alone on the terrace, the autumn breeze rustling the maple trees surrounding their property. This cold distance was becoming their new normal, and with each passing day, the vibrant, attentive man she'd married seemed to fade further away, replaced by a distracted stranger. She had ignored the first signs, the late-night calls he'd taken his study with the door closed, the sudden emergency business trips, the lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume on his shirts. Victoria had initially chided herself for being paranoid, blaming pregnancy hormones for heightening her anxieties. Mrs. Matthews, Nancy Wilson, Victoria's personal nurse, appeared at the terrace door, a warm, maternal woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. Nancy had been hired when Victoria's pregnancy had briefly been classified as high risk in the early months. "It's time for your prenatal vitamins and morning checkup." Following Nancy inside, Victoria caught a glimpse of herself in the hallway mirror. Despite her pregnant glow, there was something fragile in her reflection, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. The Matthews name carried significant weight in Connecticut social circles, and Victoria had always performed her role flawlessly, the charitable, gracious wife who hosted perfect dinner parties and served on the right committees. But now, with her husband's growing coldness and her own suspicions mounting, Victoria wondered if the perfect life she thought she had built was merely an elaborate facade. 3 weeks later, Victoria agreed to attend the annual charity gala at Lakewood Country Club, if only to maintain appearances. She donned a flowing emerald gown that elegantly showcased her pregnant figure, her hair styled in soft waves. Maxwell had barely spoken to her on the drive over. Engrossed in emails on his phone, the country club ballroom sparkled under crystal chandeliers, the cream of Connecticut society mingling over champagne and carefully curated hors d'oeuvres. Victoria moved through the crowd with practiced grace, accepting congratulations on her pregnancy and deflecting gentle inquiries about Maxwell's increasing absence from social events. Victoria, darling, her friend, Madison Hayes, approached, stunning in a silver cocktail dress. Madison, a divorcee with a sharp tongue and sharper instincts, air-kissed Victoria's cheeks. "You look absolutely radiant. Pregnancy suits you." "Thank you," Victoria smiled, grateful for the familiar face. "Though I feel less than radiant most days." Madison's perfectly arched eyebrow rose. "And where is your elusive husband tonight, I swear? Maxwell has become something of a phantom lately." Victoria gestured vaguely across the room where Maxwell stood with a group of men, engrossed in conversation. "Business never stops. Apparently." Madison's gaze followed Victoria's, then narrowed slightly. "And who, pray tell, is that woman talking to your husband now?" Victoria turned to see a striking brunette in a crimson dress that left little to the imagination approaching Maxwell. The woman placed her hand on his arm with an intimacy that sent a cold shiver down Victoria's spine. What disturbed her most wasn't the woman's beauty, it was Maxwell's reaction. His entire demeanor changed, softening in a way Victoria hadn't seen in months. "I don't know," Victoria whispered, her mouth suddenly dry. Madison took a sip of champagne, eyes never leaving the pair. "That's Sophia Blake, relatively new to our circle. Word is she's been climbing the social ladder rather efficiently." Her tone suggested exactly what kind of efficiency she meant. Victoria watched as Sophia leaned closer to Maxwell, whispering something that made him laugh, a genuine laugh that Victoria hadn't heard directed at her in weeks. Something sharp and painful twisted in her chest. "If you'll excuse me," Victoria murmured to Madison. But instead of confronting the pair, she retreated to the ladies' room. Locking herself in a stall as tears threatened to spill, she pressed her hands against her belly, feeling the baby move, as if sensing her distress. "It's okay," she whispered, uncertain whether she was reassuring the baby or herself. "We're going to be okay," when Victoria emerged, composed once more. Maxwell was alone again. He barely acknowledged her for the remainder of the evening, and when they finally left, he announced he needed to return to the office. "At 11 at night?" Victoria questioned, unable to keep the skepticism from her voice. "The Singapore market is opening," he replied flatly. "I need to be on a call." Victoria said nothing more, but as Maxwell's Bentley disappeared down the driveway, she made a decision. The next morning, she placed a call to Walter Thompson, a private investigator recommended by a friend who had gone through a similar situation years before. Thompson was in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair and eyes that missed nothing. He met Victoria at a small cafe 30 miles from Lakewood Estates, where the likelihood of running into acquaintances was minimal. "I need to know if my husband is having an affair," Victoria said quietly, her hands cradling her pregnant belly beneath the table. "I need proof one way or another." Thompson studied her for a moment. "You understand that once you know something, you can't unknow it, Mrs. Matthews." Victoria met his gaze steadily. "I'd rather face an ugly truth than continue living with beautiful lies. Mr. Thompson." It took Thompson less than 2 weeks to provide Victoria with what she had both dreaded and needed: photographs of Maxwell meeting Sophia Blake at an upscale hotel in New York City, kissing her passionately in the elevator, entering a suite together. The timestamps showed they had spent 4 hours inside before emerging. Maxwell's arm possessively around Sophia's waist. Victoria's hands trembled as she stared at the images, tears dropping onto the glossy paper. The evidence was undeniable. Her worst fears confirmed. Victoria now faced the question of what to do next. That evening, while Maxwell was supposedly at a business dinner, Victoria made another decision. With Nancy's help, she carefully installed a small, nearly invisible security camera in their bedroom, hidden within an ornate antique clock on the mantelpiece. She also began carrying a discreet audio recorder, tucked into a specially sewn pocket in her cardigans and blouses. "Are you sure about this?" Nancy asked, concern etched on her face. "What are you planning to do with the recordings?" "I don't know yet," Victoria admitted. "But I need protection. I need leverage. And most of all, I need the truth, all of it." Over the next few days, Victoria collected evidence methodically. She recorded Maxwell's late-night calls to Sophia, his whispered promises of figuring something out and being together soon. Each revelation was a fresh wound, but Victoria found strength in her growing resolve. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about her child's future. One rainy Sunday afternoon, Victoria was resting in the sitting room when the doorbell rang. Through the stained glass window in the foyer, she glimpsed a flash of red. The housekeeper answered, and moments later, Sophia Blake strode into Victoria's home as if she owned it, raindrops glistening on her leather jacket. Victoria's heart hammered in her chest as she slowly rose to her feet. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice remarkably steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her. Sophia smiled, a predatory curve of perfectly painted lips. "Victoria Matthews. I presume I'm Sophia Blake." She glanced around the sitting room, appraising the antiques and artwork with a calculating eye. "Max said I could stop by anytime I was in the area. We have some business to discuss." The audacity was breathtaking. Victoria was acutely aware of the recorder in her cardigan pocket, capturing every word of this unprecedented confrontation. "My husband isn't home," Victoria said coolly, "and I'd appreciate it if you'd leave." Sophia's smile didn't falter. "Oh, but he's on his way. He texted me just minutes ago." As if on cue, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway filtered through the windows. Victoria's stomach clenched. The baby kicked, responding to her surge of stress hormones. She took a deep breath, determined to remain calm for her child's sake. Maxwell entered, shaking rain from his umbrella, and froze upon seeing both women facing each other in the sitting room. For a brief moment, panic flashed across his face before he forced a smile. "Sophia," he said, his voice unnaturally high. "I didn't expect you so soon." "Clearly," Victoria said, her gaze never leaving her husband's face. "Would you care to explain why your colleague is in our home on a Sunday?" Maxwell cleared his throat, setting down his briefcase. "Sophia is working with me on the Westbrook acquisition. We had some details to finalize." "On a Sunday," Victoria pressed. "In our home rather than your office." Sophia moved toward Maxwell, placing her hand on his arm, the same possessive gesture Victoria had witnessed at the country club. "Max has been so generous with his time. The deal is time-sensitive, and we've been working around the clock." The intimacy in that simple touch was unmistakable. Victoria felt something inside her harden, a protective shell forming around her heart. "I think we should discuss this in the study," Maxwell said, guiding Sophia toward the hallway, avoiding Victoria's gaze. "No," Victoria said firmly. "Whatever business you have can wait until tomorrow, at your office, during business hours." She turned to Sophia. "Mrs. Blake, I'd like you to leave now." Sophia's expression darkened. "You don't get to dictate who your husband works with, or when. Perhaps if you focused more on being an interesting partner rather than just an incubator, he wouldn't need to seek intellectual stimulation elsewhere." The room seemed to drop several degrees in temperature. Maxwell shifted uncomfortably but said nothing to defend his wife. "How dare you?" Victoria whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. "How dare I?" What Sophia sneered, advancing a step closer. "State the obvious, he's outgrown you." "Victoria, he needs someone who can match his ambition, his intellect, his passion. You're just the pretty wife he married to look respectable. But now he has me." She glanced at Victoria's pregnant figure with undisguised contempt. And let's be honest, you're not exactly the vibrant woman you once were. Are you? Pregnancy can do that. I hear. Victoria stood her ground, though her heart was racing. Maxwell, she said, turning to her husband, are you going to allow her to speak to me this way in our home, while I'm carrying your child? Maxwell's face contorted, torn between the two women for a moment. Victoria thought she saw a flicker of the man she'd married, someone who would protect her, stand by her. But then he sighed, running a hand through his hair. You're making this worse, Victoria, he said, his voice low. Just let us talk in the study. This is important. The betrayal in those simple words cut deeper than any knife. Victoria stared at him, disbelief washing over her. I'm making this worse. Sophia smirked triumphantly. She flicked her dark hair over her shoulder and turned to Maxwell. See, this is exactly what I mean. Drama. Always drama with her. Something in Victoria snapped. Get out of my house, she hissed, each word razor sharp. Both of you, if necessary. Sophia laughed, the sound like breaking glass in the tense room. Or what? What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Sophia stepped forward, raised her hand, and slapped Victoria across the face. The crack echoed off the high ceilings as Victoria stumbled backward, her hand flying to her cheek in shock. For a moment, no one moved. Victoria's cheek burned, tears springing to her eyes more from the humiliation than the pain. Sophia stood with her hand still raised, a look of vicious satisfaction on her face. Maxwell lunged forward, but not to defend his wife, merely to restrain Sophia by the arm. Sophia, don't, he said, his voice urgent but not angry. You shouldn't. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The damage was done, not just by Sophia's hand, but by Maxwell's response in that critical moment. He had chosen the mistress over the mother of his child. Victoria straightened, one hand on her belly, the other still pressed to her stinging cheek. The recorder in her pocket had captured everything: the confrontation, the slap, Maxwell's tepid response, her eyes, now dry and burning with resolve, locked onto her husband's. You'll regret this, she said quietly, her voice trembling, not with fear, but with the certainty of her words. Both of you. She turned and walked from the room with as much dignity as she could muster, leaving Maxwell calling half-heartedly after her. In their bedroom, Victoria locked the door and sank onto the edge of the bed, her breathing shallow, her mind racing. Nancy rushed in, using her spare key after knocking, received no answer. Mrs. Matthews, she exclaimed, taking in Victoria's reddened cheek and trembling form. What happened? Between ragged breaths, Victoria recounted the confrontation. Nancy's face paled with anger and concern as she gently examined Victoria's cheek. We need to check your blood pressure and the baby, Nancy insisted, retrieving her medical kit. Stress like this isn't good for either of you. As Nancy worked, Victoria's shock gradually gave way to a cold clarity. She had been naive, trusting, willing to give Maxwell the benefit of the doubt despite mounting evidence. She had played by the rules of their social circle, maintaining appearances at the cost of her dignity, but no more. This isn't just about me anymore, Victoria said, placing her hand protectively over her belly. If Maxwell won't protect us, I will. That night, Victoria reviewed the recording of the confrontation, her hands steady as she transferred the audio file to her personal laptop. The evidence was damning, not just of Sophia's assault, but of Maxwell's betrayal, his failure to defend his pregnant wife in their own home. While Maxwell slept in the guest room, not even attempting to speak with her, after the incident, Victoria made another call to Walter Thompson. I need your help with something more, she told him. I need to know everything about Sophia Blake, where she came from, what she wants, who she really is. Thompson's voice was grave on the other end of the line. You're planning something, Mrs. Matthews. It wasn't a question, but Victoria answered anyway. I'm planning to protect myself and my child, Mr. Thompson, by any means necessary. The next morning, Victoria contacted Andrew Campbell, one of Connecticut's most respected family lawyers. His office, located in a discreet building in Hartford, was deliberately unremarkable, a sanctuary for high-profile clients seeking privacy during their most vulnerable moments. Campbell, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and compassionate eyes that had seen every variation of marital discord, listened intently as Victoria played the recording of the confrontation. "This is serious, Mrs. Matthews," he said when the audio ended. "Assault on a pregnant woman, in your own home, with your husband's tacit approval. You have grounds for an immediate restraining order against Mrs. Blake and potentially a legal separation from your husband." Victoria nodded, her hands folded protectively over her belly. "I need to understand all my options. Mr. Campbell, I'm not making any rash decisions, but I need to be prepared." Campbell leaned forward, his expression grave. "With the evidence you've gathered, the photographs, the recordings, you're in a strong position. Connecticut is an equitable distribution state for divorce proceedings, meaning the court will divide marital property fairly, though not necessarily equally. Given your husband's actions and the potential harm to you and your unborn child, you could receive a favorable settlement." Victoria absorbed this information, her mind racing. "I don't want to destroy Maxwell," she said finally. "I just want protection for my child and myself, and I want him to understand the consequences of his choices." Campbell nodded. "Understanding the complex emotions at play, we'll proceed carefully. First, let's file for that restraining order against Mrs. Blake. Then we'll prepare documentation for a legal separation. Should you decide to pursue that route, we won't file anything regarding your marriage until you're absolutely certain." As Victoria left Campbell's office, a strange calm settled over her. For weeks, she had been reactive, responding to Maxwell's betrayal with hurt and confusion. Now, she was taking control, creating a plan, protecting what mattered most. That evening, while reviewing the security camera footage from their bedroom, Victoria made a startling discovery. Maxwell had been on the phone with Sophia, discussing not just their affair, but a calculated strategy to paint Victoria as emotionally unstable. Pregnancy hormones making her paranoid. Maxwell had said to position himself favorably should Victoria cause problems about their relationship. "Once the baby is born, if she doesn't cooperate, we can build a case that she's unfit," Maxwell had told Sophia. "I've seen it done before. The courts favor fathers with financial stability and strong legal teams." Victoria's blood ran cold as she realized they weren't just having an affair, they were plotting against her, planning to potentially take her child if she didn't quietly accept her husband's infidelity. The depth of the betrayal was staggering. She immediately sent the footage to Campbell with a short message: "We need to move faster." The next day, Victoria received a call from Walter Thompson. His investigation into Sophia Blake had yielded interesting results. Sophia wasn't the sophisticated socialite she presented herself as. She had reinvented herself numerous times, changing her name from Sarah Blackwood and leaving behind a trail of wealthy, married men whose bank accounts and reputations had suffered after their entanglements with her. "She's a professional," Thompson explained. "She targets wealthy, married men, establishes herself in their lives, and then either extorts them or positions herself to benefit financially when the marriage inevitably collapses." Victoria's suspicions crystallized into certainty. "She's using Maxwell, and he's letting her," Thompson confirmed. "I've also discovered something else. Ms. Blake or Blackwood has been making inquiries about your family trust fund. She's particularly interested in the Matthews family holdings and seems to believe she can access them through your husband." This revelation added another layer to Victoria's understanding of the situation. It wasn't just an affair born of passion or Maxwell's midlife crisis. It was a calculated scheme, with her family's wealth as the ultimate prize. Armed with this knowledge, Victoria implemented the next phase of her plan. She began documenting every aspect of her pregnancy and health with meticulous care, ensuring that no one could later claim she was unfit or unstable. She also instructed Campbell to accelerate the process for the restraining order against Sophia. Meanwhile, Maxwell continued his charade of normalcy, barely acknowledging the confrontation that had occurred in their home. He spent most nights away, offering paper-thin excuses about work emergencies and international calls. When he did return home, He avoided Victoria entirely, sleeping in the guest room without explanation. One evening, Victoria overheard Maxwell on the terrace, arguing with someone on the phone, activating the recorder in her pocket. She moved closer to the open window. "You went too far," Maxwell was saying, his voice tense. "Slapping her wasn't part of the plan. You could have hurt the baby." A pause as the person, presumably Sophia, responded. "I don't care if she provoked you," Maxwell continued. "We need to be smarter about this. If she gets a restraining order, it complicates everything." Another pause. "No, I'm not defending her. I'm thinking strategically. We need to paint her as unreasonable, not ourselves as aggressive." Victoria's heart pounded as she realized that even Maxwell's apparent concern for the baby was merely tactical, not born of genuine care, but of calculating how best to position himself legally. That night, as Victoria lay in bed, her hand resting on her growing belly, she felt the baby move vigorously, as if responding to her thoughts. "We're going to be all right," she whispered. "I promise you that." The next morning, Campbell called with news. The restraining order against Sophia had been granted temporarily. Pending a full hearing the following week, Victoria would need to testify, presenting her evidence of the assault and the ongoing harassment. "Be prepared," Campbell warned. "Ms. Blake will likely counter with accusations of her own, and Maxwell might support her version of events." Victoria closed her eyes, absorbing the reality that her husband might publicly side against her. "I understand. I'll be ready." She spent the next few days gathering additional evidence, organizing her recordings, and preparing herself mentally for the hearing. Nancy stayed close, monitoring Victoria's health and providing much-needed emotional support. "You're the strongest woman I know," Nancy told her one evening as they shared tea in the kitchen. "Many would have crumbled under this kind of betrayal, especially while pregnant." Victoria smiled sadly. "I don't feel strong. I feel necessary. Like I don't have the luxury of falling apart because someone else depends on me now." She placed her hand on her belly, feeling the baby shift. "Besides, my mother always said that true strength isn't about never breaking, it's about how you put yourself back together." The night before the hearing, Victoria couldn't sleep. She paced her bedroom, rehearsing her testimony, reviewing the evidence one last time. Around midnight, she heard a car pull into the driveway, Maxwell returning from wherever he'd been spending his evenings. Victoria tensed, listening as he entered the house and moved through the foyer. To her surprise, his footsteps headed toward her door. A soft knock followed. "Victoria." Maxwell's voice was subdued. "Can we talk?" She hesitated, then opened the door, keeping one hand on the doorknob, ready to close it if necessary. Maxwell looked haggard, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled, dark circles under his eyes. "What do you want, Maxwell?" He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd once found endearing. "I heard about the restraining order against Sophia. The hearing tomorrow." Victoria's expression remained neutral. "And this is getting out of hand," he said, an edge of frustration in his voice. "Legal proceedings, restraining orders, it's unnecessary drama. We could handle this privately." "Like how you handled it when she slapped me in our home," Victoria countered, her voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "When you stood by and did nothing while your pregnant wife was assaulted." Maxwell had the decency to look ashamed, if only briefly. "That was unfortunate. Sophia lost her temper. It won't happen again." "You're right about that," Victoria agreed coldly. "It won't happen again because she will legally be required to stay away from me. And if either of you violates that order, there will be consequences." Maxwell's expression hardened. "You're being unreasonable. Sophia is important to my business dealings. This restraining order could complicate significant partnerships." Victoria stared at him, truly seeing him for perhaps the first time, not as the man she had loved, but as the stranger he had become. "My safety and our child's well-being are non-negotiable. Maxwell, if your business dealings with Sophia are more important than that, then we have nothing more to discuss." She began to close the door, but Maxwell put his hand out, stopping it. "Victoria, think about what you're doing. The Matthews name carries weight in this community. A public scandal like this should have been considered before you brought your mistress into our home. Victoria finished for him. Good night, Maxwell. This time, when she pushed the door closed, he didn't resist. Victoria leaned against it, heart pounding, but feeling stronger than she had in months. Tomorrow would be challenging, but she was ready to fight not just for herself, but for the future of her child. The morning of the hearing dawned gray and drizzly, mirroring Victoria's turbulent emotions. She dressed carefully in a conservative navy maternity dress, her hair pulled back in a simple chignon. Nancy accompanied her to the courthouse, a reassuring presence as they navigated the media that had already gathered outside. Mrs. Matthews, is it true your husband's mistress assaulted you? Called one reporter. Are you filing for divorce? Shouted another. Victoria kept her head high, one hand protectively cradling her belly as Andrew Campbell escorted her through the crowd and into the courthouse, inside the modestly sized courtroom. She saw Maxwell already seated with his attorney, Rachel Donovan, a sharp-featured woman known for her aggressive litigation style. Sophia Blake sat on the far side, looking surprisingly demure in a high-neck blouse and tailored pants, a calculated departure from her usual provocative style. Judge Eleanor Harmon, a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency, called the court to order. Campbell presented Victoria's case first, methodically laying out the evidence, the audio recording of the confrontation. Photographs of the reddened handprint on Victoria's cheek taken by Nancy immediately after the assault, and testimony from the housekeeper who had witnessed part of the altercation, when the recording played Sophia's venomous words. The unmistakable sound of the slap. Maxwell's tepid response, a murmur rippled through the courtroom. Victoria kept her eyes forward, avoiding looking at either Maxwell or Sophia. Sophia's attorney, Martin Reeves, attempted to paint the incident as a mutual disagreement that escalated and suggested Victoria had been the aggressor. Provoking Sophia with emotional accusations, he argued that Victoria was using the legal system to interfere with legitimate business relationships out of jealousy. Judge Harmon's expression grew increasingly skeptical as Reeves presented his case. When Sophia took the stand, she adopted a wounded, apologetic demeanor. I deeply regret that things escalated that day, Sophia said, her voice soft and contrite. But Mrs. Matthews was making wild accusations, becoming hysterical. I felt threatened, and I reacted poorly. I would never intentionally harm a pregnant woman. Victoria felt her blood pressure rising at the blatant lies, but maintained her composure. When it was her turn to testify, she spoke clearly and factually, describing how Sophia had appeared uninvited at her home, the verbal abuse that followed, and the unprovoked physical assault. I feared not only for my own safety but for my unborn child's, Victoria stated. Since then, Miss Anna Blake has continued to insert herself into my life, appearing at places where she knows I'll be, sending me threatening text messages, and most recently, attempting to break into my home. This last statement caused another stir in the courtroom. Campbell presented the security footage from the mansion, showing Sophia prowling around the property late at night, attempting to access the house through a side door. Maxwell, when called to testify, seemed torn under oath. He reluctantly confirmed that Sophia had indeed slapped Victoria, though he characterized it as a momentary loss of control during a heated discussion. He neither confirmed nor denied the affair, citing business confidentiality when questioned about the nature of his relationship with Sophia. After hearing all testimony, Judge Harmon took only a brief recess before returning with her decision. The evidence in this case is clear and compelling, she stated firmly. The court finds that Mrs. Blake poses a credible threat to Mrs. Matthews' safety and well-being. The temporary restraining order is hereby made permanent. Ms. Blake is to remain at least 500 feet from Mrs. Matthews, her home, and any location where Mrs. Matthews is known to be present. Any violation will result in immediate arrest. The judge then fixed Sophia with a stern gaze. Furthermore, the evidence of attempted breaking and entering has been referred to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. This court takes the safety of pregnant women very seriously. Ms. Blake, Sophia's face contorted with barely contained rage. She suddenly stood, ignoring her attorney's attempt to restrain her. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. "She's manipulating all of you. She's the one who's unstable, not me." "Ms. Blake," Judge Harmon warned, "control yourself or I'll hold you in contempt." But Sophia was beyond caution. "You think you've won," she hissed at Victoria. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." "That's enough," Judge Harmon said sharply, nodding to the bailiff. "Remove Ms. Blake from my courtroom," as Sophia was escorted out, still hurling threats. Victoria remained seated, one hand on her belly, feeling the baby move restlessly as if sensing the tension. Maxwell wouldn't meet her eyes, his gaze fixed on the floor, his attorney whispering urgently in his ear. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy had intensified. Campbell created a protective barrier around Victoria as they navigated to the waiting car. "Mrs. Matthews, do you have a statement?" called a reporter from the Hartford Courier. Victoria paused briefly. "I sought this restraining order to protect myself and my unborn child," she said, her voice steady. "I am grateful to the court for recognizing that need. That's all I have to say at this time." In the car, Victoria finally allowed herself to exhale, the tension of the morning leaving her body in a rush. "What happens now?" she asked Campbell. "Now we proceed with the legal separation, if that's still what you want," he replied. "The restraining order against Miss Blake strengthens our position considerably. Maxwell's testimony, while reluctant, did confirm the assault. He's on shaky ground. Victoria nodded, staring out at the rain-slicked streets. "Let's move forward," she said quietly. "I need to protect my child from all of this." Back at the mansion, Victoria found Maxwell waiting in the foyer, his expression unreadable. She tensed, instinctively placing a hand on her belly. "We need to talk," he said, his voice oddly subdued. Victoria nodded toward the sitting room, keeping a careful distance between them. Once seated, Maxwell ran a hand over his face, suddenly looking older than his 35 years. "I didn't want it to come to this," he began. "Public hearings, restraining orders, our private business becoming gossip for the entire state." "What did you want, Maxwell?" Victoria asked, too tired for anger. "For me to quietly accept your affair? To allow your mistress to assault me in our home?" He had the grace to look ashamed. "I got lost. Sophia was exciting, different. She made me feel..." "Stop," Victoria interrupted. "I don't need to hear how she made you feel. What matters is how you made me feel betrayed, humiliated, unsafe in my own home while carrying your child." Maxwell's shoulders slumped. "I never meant for you to get hurt. Things just spiraled." Victoria studied him, the man she had once built her life around. Now a stranger sitting across from her. "Andrew Campbell is preparing legal separation papers," she said evenly. "I think it's best if you move out in the meantime." "You're serious about this?" It wasn't a question. "I've never been more serious about anything in my life," Victoria confirmed. "You chose her, Maxwell, repeatedly, even after she assaulted me. What did you expect?" He stood abruptly, pacing the room. "And what about our child? Have you thought about what this means for our baby, growing up in a broken home?" Victoria's eyes flashed. "Don't you dare," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "Don't you dare use our child as a weapon. Not when you were the one who brought danger into this home. Not when you were discussing with Sophia how to paint me as an unfit mother to take my baby away." Maxwell froze. "What are you talking about?" Victoria reached for her phone, pulled up the bedroom security footage, and played Maxwell's conversation with Sophia about building a case against Victoria after the birth. The color drained from Maxwell's face as he heard his own voice discussing strategies to separate Victoria from her child. "How did you—" "I protected myself," Victoria said simply. "When it became clear you wouldn't..." Maxwell sank back into his chair, the reality of his situation finally dawning on him. You've been recording everything. Not everything, Victoria corrected. Just the parts where you and your mistress plotted against me and my child. They sat in silence for a long moment. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the only sound in the room. I'll have my things out by tomorrow, Maxwell finally said, his voice hollow. My attorney will contact Campbell about the separation terms. As he rose to leave, Victoria called after him. There's something else you should know. Maxwell, he turned, wary. Walter Thompson's investigation revealed some interesting things about Sophia Blake, or should I say, Sarah Blackwood. She's done this before, with at least 3 other wealthy men. She's not in love with you. She's after the Matthews fortune. Maxwell's expression shifted from shock to disbelief to the first stirrings of doubt. You're lying. The files are on the desk in your study, Victoria said calmly. Bank records showing unusual transfers from your accounts to offshore holdings. Background checks revealing her previous identities. Testimonials from her previous targets. Read them, or don't. It's your choice. She stood carefully, one hand supporting her back as her pregnancy made quick movements increasingly difficult. But know this, I won't allow her to take what belongs to our child's future. Whatever happens between us, I will protect what my family has built. Maxwell stared at her, seeing perhaps for the first time the steel beneath Victoria's gentle exterior, without another word. He turned and left the room. Victoria heard his footsteps heading toward the study, where Thompson's files awaited. That night, Victoria slept more peacefully than she had in months. The weight of secrets and uncertainty finally lifted from her shoulders. Whatever came next. She had taken control of her own narrative. The following weeks brought a flurry of legal activity. Maxwell moved into a downtown apartment, and the legal separation was finalized with surprisingly little resistance from him. Thompson's revelations about Sophia had apparently hit their mark. Maxwell had begun to distance himself from her, especially after discovering significant unauthorized transfers from his business accounts. Victoria focused on preparing for her child's arrival, converting one of the mansion's rooms into a nursery painted in soothing shades of yellow and green. She resumed some of her charitable work, carefully selecting events that would cause minimal stress and where she could count on supportive friends like Madison. It was Madison who first alerted Victoria to an alarming development. Have you seen this? She asked during a lunch date, sliding her tablet across the table. On the screen was a social media post from Sophia Blake, featuring a blurry image taken through a window of Victoria's home, accompanied by a rambling caption accusing Victoria of fabricating evidence and manipulating the courts. Most disturbing was the final line, "The truth will come out before that baby arrives. Count on it." Victoria's blood ran cold, despite the restraining order. Sophia was still watching her, still threatening her. She immediately contacted Campbell, who arranged for increased security at the mansion and filed a violation report with the police. That evening, as Victoria sat in the nursery arranging baby clothes, she heard a crash from downstairs, heart pounding. She locked the nursery door and called security. Within minutes, the house alarm blared, and she heard shouting, followed by the wail of police sirens. Later, wrapped in a blanket in the sitting room, Victoria listened as the head of security explained what had happened. Sophia had indeed broken into the mansion, apparently intending to access Victoria's computer and destroy evidence. She had been caught by security cameras and apprehended by the guards until police arrived. She was ranting, Mrs. Matthews, the security chief said grimly. Something about exposing the truth and taking back what's hers. The police have taken her into custody for violating the restraining order and breaking and entering. Victoria nodded, still trembling slightly from the adrenaline. Thank you for your quick response. Please double-check all entry points before you leave. After the security team departed, Victoria called Campbell to update him, then Maxwell, who arrived at the mansion within 30 minutes, clearly shaken. Are you all right? He asked, genuine concern in his voice for the first time in months. The baby. We're fine, Victoria assured him, surprised by his apparent sincerity. Just shaken. Maxwell sank into a chair opposite her, running a hand through his disheveled hair. This is my fault. I never should have gotten involved with her. I never should have brought her into our lives." Victoria studied him, noting the dark circles under his eyes, the rumpled clothes so unlike his usually impeccable appearance. "What's happening with you and Sophia now?" she asked carefully. Maxwell gave a bitter laugh. "It's over. Has been since I discovered she was systematically draining funds from my accounts. Nearly $3 million. Victoria, transferred to offshore accounts I can't trace." He shook his head. "But that's not the worst of it. She's been sleeping with James Warner." Victoria raised an eyebrow. James Warner was Maxwell's business partner and supposed friend. "For how long?" "At least 2 months, Maxwell said, the betrayal fresh in his voice. "While she was still with me, while she was telling me she loved me, it was all a con, just like you said." They sat in silence for a moment, the grandfather clock ticking in the background. "I've been a fool," Maxwell finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I threw away everything that mattered for a woman who saw me as nothing but a bank account, and I hurt the one person who truly cared about me in the process." Victoria felt a complicated mixture of vindication and sorrow. The man before her was a shadow of the confident, dynamic person she had married, yet she couldn't find it in herself to offer comfort. The wounds were still too fresh, the betrayal too profound. "I should go," Maxwell said, standing. "I just needed to make sure you were safe." He paused at the doorway. "Victoria, I know it doesn't change anything, but I am sorry. Truly." After he left, Victoria sat in the quiet house, one hand on her belly, feeling the baby's movements. "It's just us now," she whispered, "but we're going to be okay." The next morning brought news that Sophia had been formally charged with multiple crimes violation of the restraining order, breaking and entering, attempted theft, and, most seriously, financial fraud based on evidence Maxwell had provided to the authorities. She was being held without bail due to the risk she posed to Victoria and her pattern of threatening behavior. Campbell called with an update on the separation proceedings. "In light of recent events, Maxwell's team has agreed to all our terms," he explained. "Full financial support for you and the baby. The mansion remains yours, and a trust fund for the child that Maxwell cannot access. He's not contesting anything." Victoria. "And visitation rights?" Victoria asked, thinking of the child who would soon enter this complicated situation. "Supervised visits only, until the child is at least 1 year old." Campbell confirmed. "After that, we can reassess based on Maxwell's behavior and commitment to being a responsible father." Victoria thanked him and hung up, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and relief. This wasn't how she had imagined her life unfolding when she married Maxwell 5 years ago. But she was determined to create a stable, loving environment for her child, regardless of the circumstances. As her due date approached, Victoria found herself increasingly reflective. She sorted through old photographs, journals, and mementos from happier times, trying to make peace with the past before stepping into her future as a mother. One afternoon, while organizing the study, she came across a small velvet box tucked in the back of a drawer. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny heart. A note in Maxwell's handwriting read, "For our baby's first birthday, with all my love, Dad." Victoria's eyes filled with tears as she realized Maxwell must have purchased this months ago, before the affair, before everything fell apart, somewhere in the chaos. He had once looked forward to being a father, had planned for a future with their child. The thought was both comforting and heartbreaking. She was still holding the bracelet when her water broke. The labor was long but uncomplicated. Nancy stayed by Victoria's side throughout, offering encouragement and support. Madison arrived halfway through, bringing flowers and steady companionship. Victoria had decided weeks earlier not to notify Maxwell until after the birth. She needed this moment to be peaceful, focused solely on bringing her child safely into the world. After 14 hours, Faith Elizabeth Matthews was born 7 pounds, 8 ounces, with a dusting of blonde hair and her mother's blue eyes, as the nurse placed the tiny bundle in Victoria's arms. A profound love unlike anything she had ever experienced washed over her. "Hello, Faith," she whispered, tracing a finger along her daughter's perfect cheek. I've been waiting so long to meet you. Only after mother and baby were settled did Victoria send a brief text to Maxwell. Faith Elizabeth Matthews, born 4:17 a.m., 7 lbs, 8 Oz, both doing well. Maxwell arrived at the hospital 2 hours later, hesitating at the doorway of the private room. A large teddy bear clutched awkwardly in his hands. Come in, Victoria said softly, nodding to the chair beside her bed. Meet your daughter. Maxwell approached carefully, setting the bear on a side table. His eyes widened as he took in the tiny face nestled against Victoria's chest. She's perfect, he whispered, tears gathering in his eyes. She looks like you. Victoria smiled, the first genuine smile she had directed at Maxwell in months. Would you like to hold her? Carefully, she transferred Faith into her father's arms. Maxwell cradled her with surprising tenderness, one finger gently stroking her tiny hand. When Faith reflexively gripped his finger, a tear slid down his cheek. I've made so many mistakes, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't deserve this moment. Victoria watched them, her heart full of complicated emotions. Faith deserves to know her father, she said simply. What kind of relationship you build with her is up to you. It will depend on your choices going forward. Maxwell nodded, understanding the weight of her words. I want to be in her life. Victoria, I want to be the father she deserves. Then be that man, Victoria replied. Not for me, but for her. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the beeping of hospital monitors and Faith's occasional soft sounds the only interruption. It wasn't forgiveness, Victoria wasn't ready for that, but it was a beginning, a fragile bridge toward a new kind of future. 3 months later, Victoria sat on the terrace of what was now officially her home, Faith sleeping peacefully in a bassinet beside her. The legal separation had evolved into divorce proceedings, handled with surprising civility on both sides. Maxwell, seemingly transformed by fatherhood and chastened by his near destruction at Sophia's hands, had honored every agreement, attending parenting classes and proving himself reliable during his supervised visits with Faith. Sophia Blake had pleaded guilty to reduced charges in exchange for returning most of the stolen funds and agreeing to leave the state permanently after serving a short prison sentence. The scandal had gradually faded from the headlines, replaced by newer, more sensational stories. Victoria's phone chimed with a text from Madison. Lunch tomorrow. I've got the latest on Rebecca Thornfield's disaster of a charity gala. Victoria smiled, typing a quick affirmative response. Life was settling into a new normal, not the one she had planned, but one she was creating on her own terms. Faith stirred in her bassinet, making the little snuffling sound that usually preceded waking. Victoria lifted her daughter into her arms, breathing in the sweet baby scent of her hair. We made it, little one, she murmured, and we're going to be just fine. As the afternoon sun bathed them in golden light, Victoria felt a sense of peace wash over her. The path forward would have its challenges, but she had discovered a strength within herself that no betrayal could diminish, a resilience that would guide both her and Faith toward whatever the future held. In the quiet garden of what had once been a monument to her perfect marriage, Victoria Matthews had built something far more valuable, a testament to her own worth, independent of anyone else's validation. And as Faith's tiny hand curled around her finger, Victoria knew with absolute certainty that this moment, this love, this hard-won freedom was worth every painful step of the journey.